Hello, welcome to 21 This Week. I'm Susan Heltemes filling in for Casey Aiken. Coming up next, Dr. Jekyll or Governor Hogan. Great week for Chris Van Hollen and good news in Montgomery County. Our panel of insiders will provide local insight on the news and, of course, parting shots. Today we're joined by former Democratic State Delegate Luiz Simmons, Mark Uncapher, past chair of the Montgomery County Republican Party, and Republican activist Jerry Cave. Stay tuned for these stories and more next on 21 This Week. In January, when Governor Hogan was inaugurated, he spoke of goodwill and bipartisanship exuding great joy, and Marylanders were led to believe that unicorns, rainbows, and lollipops were around the corner. Then the budget negotiations began, with tensions mounting to a level this week that rivaled the Wisconsin Badgers and Duke Blue Devils basketball game. Well, Democratic Senate leaders this week were actually meeting with Hogan's budget gurus, who are mostly former Republican elected officials or early appointees. The governor threw a tantrum and pulled the rug out from under the negotiations. Over $75 million had been moved to a dedicated purpose account from an overpayment to the pension account. The press release that was issued during the meeting, no less, came from Doug Mayer, the governor's communications director, who came to Maryland from Governor Nikki Haley's office in South Carolina, and other communications staff came from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's office. This out-of-state, lean farther to the right mentality has caused some in Annapolis to wonder who's in charge. Dr. Jekyll, the out-of-state take Maryland to the right model, or the moderate local mentality that Governor Hogan spoke of during the campaign. The battle intensified when Hogan's campaign organization on Wednesday sent out a tweet that stated, "We won Miller and Bush's districts overwhelmingly. Hopefully they're paying attention." Now, Luiz, a budget deal had been made with most Republicans supporting the measure to take that $75 million out of the overpayment to help fund geographic cost of education disparity that affects Montgomery County, Prince George's, and Baltimore City. This is a big deal for us. You just left Annapolis. How do you assess what's going on this year?
Well, look, the governor wants to have as many balls in the air as he can so that he'll be able to try to get part of his program through. And I think that at the last moment, Bobby Neal, who really is a genius, and I served with back in 1979, former Republican, became a Democratic state senator, then lost election, is there advising him and is telling him to take a hard line in terms of trying to get the tax breaks that he wants to extend, as you were pointing out, to first responders and others. So they're going to kind of hold this hostage. I would expect by midnight that we don't go into an extended session. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be some type of a compromise where we may not get $75 million, maybe we'll get 2/3 of that, with a portion of that being, going to the tax reductions, and maybe even a smaller increase in payment for the pension, because the pension really is a long-term problem and we've been kicking the can down the road. So I think he's trying to do that, and we as Democrats are trying to make sure that education gets as fully funded as we can.
Now, Susan, let me push back, though. You characterize it as a $75 million overpayment of the pension, and that, I think that's a mischaracterization. Our Maryland state pension is underfunded by literally in the tens of billions of dollars. State employees gave up, made more contributions with the understanding that the state was going to match that. This was done years ago in basically a compromise. What taking back that payment does is really go back on a deal that was made a number of years ago for the state to pay more of its fair share to make up for this pension this pension deficit.
That may be the case, but it was interesting. There was a bipartisan agreement to do that because of the need for this geographic disparity. So, but we can get back to that in a moment. But Jerry, beyond the budget issues, Annapolis observers now are debating what's going to happen when these bills start hitting the governor's desk. A good example is a bill that our very own Senator Rich Manalino introduced that closed a loophole on sales taxes from online travel sites that passed. The Marriott Corporation, the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, and the Hotel and Lodging Association all supported the measure and went to Governor Hogan. The governor's support now is questioned because Grover Norquist and ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, wrote to the governor stating that it's a tax. Everyone loves closing a loophole, and it brings money into the state coffers that should be there. What's the governor going to do on this one?
This is one of the bargaining chips in this negotiation process, so which way this chip is going to fall at the end, nobody knows, and I certainly don't. But what I do know is your introductory remarks, mischaracterization of Governor Hogan does a disservice to our audience. I know a lot of tantrum-throwing Irishmen. I've even been accused of being one myself, and Larry Hogan is not a tantrum thrower. He is cool, calm, and collected, and what you don't like is the man got elected to reduce taxes, stop the increases, do the right thing, and he is in Annapolis doing that. And what Mark talked about on the pensions is one of the right things to do. We have one of the highest unfunded pension liabilities, and he's not going to let the Democrats kick the can down the road and do that kind of thing. He ran on something, and he's doing what he said he would, and he's being very calm about it. He's being very gentlemanly about it, and he's negotiating well with Bush and Miller, who he knows, and they will work this out. But the man's doing what he said.
Well, and would question whether he's working well with them. But Mark, the governor's beloved rain tax has been resolved by codifying current practice into so that jurisdictions continue what they're doing, or they can come up with an alternative plan, but all must submit an annual report. Governor Hogan's plan to exempt all military retirement from taxes is not faring as well. Vets now get a $5,000 exemption in Maryland, and the Senate raised that to $10,000. But the governor has picked a fight with the House on this one, although he said he was okay with it. The average income for military retirees in Maryland is $128,000 to include military retirement pay. That's not exactly poverty level by any means. Does the passage of this rain tax, which is about his only campaign problems that's gone through, mean that he's a success?
Well, I think that he's measured as success is broader than just the rain tax. And let me tell you, the average military pension is about $10,000 less than the average federal employee pension. It's around $22,000. The average federal pension is around $32,000. You're kind of adding in other income that
Right.
Marylanders will have. Looking at the pension, military gets less. I think it makes sense to have the compromise is 5 to 10 is part of the negotiation. But it's a reason to encourage those people to stay in the state. You know, listen to what we're talking about. We're talking about the hotel tax, the rain tax. The fault line seems to be here, frustration that Larry Hogan wants to hold the line on increasing taxes. And that's what he ran on.
But back to the hotel tax for a minute. The agencies that do it collect it as tax, but they pocket it saying, we don't need to do it because technically the tax wasn't on the whole thing.
I understand. One person's loophole closer is another person's increase in tax. And so this will be part, I mean, it's an open question, particularly with the way that the difficulty in treating online sales in this country, where many online sales of the same product bought across state lines are not taxed because of the difficulty in collecting that, and that's been the law for quite some time.
Here's my prediction. He's not a right-winger, and in the end, he's not going to be as concerned with what Alex says as he is with what he understands the constituents in the state. In my opinion, he will sign the Madaleno tax bill because it collects revenues, and he will find a way as part of a package that we're discussing, not knowing the specifics, to provide some tax relief, like it or not, to military people and first responders. And he will end up increasing or giving us here in Montgomery County some additional monies that we need, maybe not the full $75 million, but I bet it's going to go up there. What he is doing is attempting again to make sure that he has as many irons on the fire so that he can compromise here and he can give something up here. And I think in the end, though, I think that the most telling thing about Hogan is that he is going to sign the Madaleno bill because he knows it's not a tax the way you're taxing individuals, and that will be a source of revenue where he can help pay for cost of education index. He can help pay or provide some relief for the first responders. I think he's going to come across as a moderate but slightly to the right politician as opposed to someone who is lurched to the right at the end of this session.
Well, as you're saying, there's only about 72 hours left from the time that we tape this show. Sine Die is Monday night, and there are still lots of issues to resolve. For instance, fracking. The House has asked for a 3-year moratorium, the Senate 2 years and 2 months. Charter schools, they're talking about flexibility in hiring administrators and policies and selection policies. And the governor, he talked about Democrats doing this, taking money from the local tax refund on the end of June and $100 million and putting it back on July 1st. And the fund is well endowed. What the Democrats are saying, let's keep 90 million of that for a time being and use it for other things. Now, what he wants to do is use it to Medicaid funding for pregnant women. He wants to use it for caretakers of the disabled. And he wants to use it for issues like that where he had originally said that he wasn't going to do it. So we are there now. It's almost over. Oh, and one of the most important things in there, by some people's standards, is fund the 2% pay increase that went into effect January 1st. If that's not funded, then as of July 1st, state employees would get, in essence, a 2% deduction in their pay. So there's a lot of things to do, very little time. We started the conversation. What is it? Lou, we'll start with you. You've been there. What's going to happen in the next 72 hours?
I do think that we're not going to go into an extended session. I think that they are.
None at all?
I'm going to prognosticate and say I don't think there'll be an extended session. I think that's my opinion, I think they will hammer out many of the compromises you're speaking about on fracking and on the 2%. I think, by the way, I think it's terribly important that state workers not lose the 2% increase. They are woefully underpaid compared to county workers. And that, again, going back to the context, you need revenues, though, for this. So whether a portion of it is a bookkeeping measure that comes from the what's something we did in previous years when Comptroller Franchot discovered that we had this little reservoir of money that was being held by the counties. I think they'll find a way. I really do, because if you look at Senator Miller has been remarkably conciliatory. Speaker Bush, I think, has been pretty reasonable to deal with, although he's been a little bit more prickly. But when you look at other state legislatures where there's a division between Republicans and Democrats, this is really a kerfuffle compared to what you see.
Jerry, we have like 10 seconds left for each of Jerry, Mark, what do you think is going to come?
Let's back up to the first two issues you talked about.
10 seconds.
The Democrats are completely on the wrong side of fracking. Fracking has lowered energy prices, created much more wealth in the country, and created a lot of jobs. And Maryland is not participating in that, which is stupid. And also the Democrats are standing in the way of charter schools, which will help children and the children who need it the most.
Mark, 10 seconds. There we are. Okay, we're going to be right back after a short break. We're back. Now, good news for Chris Van Hollen's Senate bid this week when he gained the endorsements of not only Prince George's County Executive Rushern Baker and Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner and former Congresswoman Beverly Byron. Lou, what does this mean, especially Baker's endorsement?
I don't think it means much, and I'll tell you why. I think Donna Edwards is going to try to channel Barbara Mikulski. She is going to come as a scrappy outsider, the one who's against the establishment, and she's going to try, and it won't be that difficult, to portray Chris Van Hollen basically as an establishment guy. So I don't really think that Donna Edwards was expecting to receive endorsements like that of Baker. And if I was Van Hollen, I would hope that Baker did more for me than he did for Anthony Brown.
Okay, so now we know what's going on the Democratic side. We haven't heard anything on the Republican side. What's happening over
Well,
there?
I think one of the big decisions that's got to be made is really focused on District 6, is that Dan Bongino ran for the Senate, came extremely close in the last election. He was outspent by over $1 million by John Delaney and came within 3,000 votes. John Delaney got less than 50%. So a lot of eyes are on Dan Bongino. Does he take another run and with the support of the National Party, take out John Delaney in 6, will be a very competitive race, or decide to run for the U.S. Senate?
And actually, that's not what's going to happen, because John Delaney is going to run for the Senate. And John Delaney is going to do to Chris Van Hollow what he did to Rob Garaggioli when he ran for the House. John Delaney is smarter than any of these other guys. It doesn't make any difference if the Democratic political machine is behind the other guys. He's smarter and he's got more money, and this is his raison d'etre. This is why he got into politics, to run for this. You heard it here first, and that's going to happen. He was on the best radio show in the market this morning talking to Chris Plant, who's a genius, and this was his first feelers on it. Today was the end for Chris Van Hollow. It's John Delaney.
He's not running for Senate. He's going to be running for governor in 2 years.
That's what I'm hearing too, that he's going to run. And that the other point that on the Democratic side is Elijah Cummings maybe coming out in the next week or so.
Will he have traction as a former congressman running for governor?
I think that what he's looking at is that who will be running for governor in 2 years, and he's looking at a crowded Democratic field, and he's attempting to determine, does he have a path to the nomination in the Democratic primary. Now, it's not going to be easy, no easier than it would be running for United States Senate, but I'm almost very confident to tell you that he's determined that right now he does not have a path to the Senate unless some things would radically change.
That appears
Now,
to be.
Francho is positioning himself to run for governor. I'm sure it'll be a crowded field, but this all comes down to TV and marketing, and Delaney is going to go there.
And you got the last word there. Okay, good news for Montgomery County this week, and that GlaxoSmithKline is bringing 1,000 employees to a new Rockville center, and the Sarbanes Transit Center should be operational around August. Now, this fails, however, in import because of the news that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is announcing her candidacy on Sunday. What's this all mean, guys? Jerry's being very quiet. Mark, why don't we go to you?
Well, I hadn't really been paying attention to that announcement. There were some other announcements for president this week, too, as there will be going forward.
Rand Paul came forward.
Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and there'll be more in the future. I mean, clearly this is the season where folks are getting into the race. I think that Hillary Clinton is going to have a much harder time than a lot of folks in the media have been predicting. I think when she gets in, as a candidate, she's had a history of sort of coming back down to earth when you look at the poll numbers.
Hillary has a number of problems. Number one, she's not Bill. Bill was a masterful politician, very likable, and Hillary is not. And I'll be honest with you, it is much harder to run for office when you're older if you're a woman. And it's just a plain fact, and I think that's more difficult, and it'll be more difficult for her. I don't think she has as good a personality. Everybody says she's going to win the nomination, she's going to win the election. Wow, that sounds like 2008, and it didn't happen then either. Might she do it? Yes. Is it a lock? Absolutely not.
So, Lou, from a Democratic perspective, what's happening out there?
Well, I think that Maryland is ready for Secretary Clinton. There's no question about it, at least in my opinion. She's got very, very substantial, consistent support here. Many people just waiting to come out. It's like anything else. I think that unless Martin O'Malley were to suddenly catch fire from his 1% in the polls, that she will ultimately.
It's up to 2, I think.
Is it 2? I think that's when you add in the senator from Virginia.
Okay.
The two of them have 2%.
Well, what's interesting.
How is Hillary Clinton going to answer this question? What was her accomplishment as Secretary of State? That's the answer. Silence.
How
is she going
many
to answer that?
Secretary of States have that much accomplishment? I mean, I think that most don't have that much, but I don't know.
Boy, that's a heck of a platform to run on. hey, I don't have any accomplishments, but the other guys didn't either. That's not going to get you elected president.
I am not Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
nor
well,
am I running your
well,
campaign.
I think
She doesn't have an answer for that question, and that's just the first one.
I think that basically, though, the answer of Hillary Clinton, and there would be many answers, is that unlike a number of the Republican administrations before that led us into war and sometimes misled us into war and misrepresented, perhaps as a result of ignorance, not as a result of duplicity, that she was part of an administration that has been more cautious and more conservative and that has attempted to extricate ourselves from areas where, frankly, the old Bush administration injected us. So I don't think she has anything to apologize for in terms of her tenure. She is a very, very intelligent person. Obviously, she served with her husband, was an extraordinary part of that administration. It's an administration that many Democrats
And wait a minute,
independents
guys.
think fondly about. And
This is
I think
time
we should
is,
give Lewis more time. Can you name one of her accomplishments?
Okay, we got to
that makes
go
her
right now.
qualified for president?
She kept
Guys,
us out of war.
This is it. And in May, supposedly, Governor O'Malley is announcing. We're going to be right
Yes,
back
the Middle
with
East
parting
is so
shots.
peaceful.
Now with parting shots, Jerry Cave.
When I first got active in politics about 5 years ago, I sat down, had lunch with a friend of mine for 40 years, and for the last 35 years, he had worked in charter schools in the District of Columbia. And he said, when it comes to education and politics, it's not about the children, it's about the adults. And I was dumbfounded and disgusted. Charter schools are one of the best thing that can happen for the people that need it the most, the underprivileged. And I hear the criticism from the Democrats, it doesn't solve all of the problems. And that is so monumentally stupid as a response, it's staggering. If it solves some of the problem, that's better than not solving any. Louisiana and New Orleans, they are converting all of their schools to charter schools. It's having great response. And the Democrats in the state of Maryland should be ashamed of themselves that they are not exuberant in the support of charter schools, even though it runs against their teachers' union, which is all powerful in the state. But it should be, in education, all about the children.
Okay, Lou, you're up next.
Let me go back to fracking and to go to a sleeper bill, which is very, very important. Senator Robert Zirkin, Democrat, Baltimore County, and chairman of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee, introduced in the Senate. It passed from the Senate, is now before, as of this morning, the Environmental Matters Committee in the House, the fracking liability bill. And what that bill does is to create, in effect, strict liability for those exploiters of fracking if they cause damage. And by calling it ultra hazardous and imposing strict liability, we are protecting the environment. We're also protecting individuals who may be damaged by it. It also makes it illegal for the fracking companies to impose in contracts when they go to your land a waiver of liability, which they do in other states. Also allows you to compel them to disclose the chemicals that they have pumped into the ground. So very important bill. I think it will, if we do have fracking, it will ensure that we at least make substantial efforts toward making it safe.
Okay, Mark, you're last.
We've talked a lot about the horse race questions of Hogan, Miller, Bush, are they getting along? But I think it's important not to lose sight of the numbers that are really driving this conversation, which is that Maryland's spending, government spending at the state level, has been increasing over 5%, whereas revenues have been going up by 3.5%. And so the difference, the debate is really about bringing the spending growth back down to where the revenues are going up, which means that we don't have to have an increase in taxes. And it's that difference from a 5% increase to a 3.5% increase that is the fundamental difference that we're talking about. Larry Hogan ran on a platform of not increasing taxes, of bringing that in line, and I think at the end of the day, that's what we'll see from the legislature, and that shows an accomplishment on the part of the governor.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And Casey Aiken is not with us tonight because he's off celebrating his birthday. So happy birthday, Casey Aiken. We're thinking of you. And until next time, follow 21 This Week on social media, and see you next time for Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Susan Heltemes. Bye for now.
If you store your guns properly,
I'll feel safer when I'm playing outside.
Safer when walking home.
I won't have to tell so many family members. I'm sorry.
I won't hear as many scary stories.
And I won't have to tell my kids. This isn't a drill.
Please.
please.
Do it for us.
Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. Remember, always, lock it up. Visit ncpc.org.